Well, welcome everyone. Thrilled to have another conscious leadership conversation. We will have it with a good friend and partner, Cliff Kayser here, and Cliff is with Polarity Partnerships. So, welcome to today, and Cliff, thank you. I love you. You do some amazing work, brother, and yeah, just turning it over to you. Looking forward to your session.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Joel, for the warm introduction. Um, I think it was important for me to just start out by saying that we share some of the same mission elements. Uh, Ours is more directly focused on this enhancing the quality of life by supplementing either or thinking with both and thinking. So that's our contribution in many ways to the leadership consciousness dimension that that Joel was talking about. And this is not intended to be like a marketing presentation, but we certify people individually, we certify organizations, we have strategic partners like Leadership Forum Community that we work with to help advance our shared goals. Our agenda for today is pretty straightforward. We want to improve our conscious leadership using polarity thinking. I know we can't boil the ocean here in an hour, but we can at least give you a primer on the 5-step small process for those of you who, unlike Chris, who haven't read both books. Congratulations, that's pretty good, Chris. So what we're going to do, the acronym is pretty straightforward. Start small to go big. So how do you do big things? Start small, seeing, mapping, assessing, learning, and leveraging. We're going to also look at some of the tensions that may not have been leveraged well in the past that led us to the need to celebrate Juneteenth. And so we'll tip our hat even more so than just tipping our hat. We'll look at a whole laundry list of polarity tensions that underlie justice, equity, diversity, inclusion type tensions in honor of today. We'll also talk about how conscious leadership gets undermined, what gets in the way of that. And then I thought it might be interesting for you all to just see that polarity thinking is a real, it's a supplement and an enhancement to a lot of what people are already doing. And that's what attracted me to this approach. I realized after I hired Barry Johnson when I was vice president of organization development for a bank, that most of the certifications that I held, Myers-Briggs, and others, they were, a lot of those models were based on polarities. And I was thinking, gosh, as an educated consumer of these tools, it makes sense to at least learn about get the key to the castle here in terms of learning about how interdependencies work. So I gave an example of Stephen Covey's book, Speed of Trust, as a way to show how you can use the polarity map to supplement and enhance an existing body of work. And there are many ways of doing that. We're going to have you all do some practice and discussion, and we'll have some time for question and answer at the end. So I'm gonna rifle through this stuff as quickly as I can so that we can get into the breakouts and have you do some interactive work. First thing I want to say is this is not some new management fad or flavor of the month. I mean, these tensions have been talked about as long as humans have been writing. And more recently, in the last, say, 50 years, there are lots of terms that are being used to highlight these tensions and the existence of these tensions as if we're not aware of them already. Wicked problems was one of the first over a half century ago. C. West Churchman said that, you can't solve everything by rational analysis. There's systems issues, and they require the collective intelligence of people collective engagement of people to learn their way to solutions. If we had the solution, we would just do it. But there are some problems he called wicked that just they never go away. And that is pretty much the same description that Ron Heifetz, when he talks about adaptive problem solving, he basically says that technical leadership solves problems. It's sort of IQ related, but there are these other categories of tensions that leaders deal with that require more emotional, social intelligence, more adaptive type of leadership. So he makes that distinction. I think Barry Johnson probably has done more to make this distinction clear between solvable problems and polarities that are inherently unsolvable. His first book in the early 90s was titled Polarity Management, How to Identify and Manage Unsolvable Problems. And that gets people's attention. It's like, well, show me a problem I can't solve. And the engineers in particular. So he identified key principles and then started developing the polarity map. If you look at the polarity map from his first book, you'll see that it looks nothing like the map that's in volume 1 and 2. And that's because the theory is evolving. It's changing all the time. We're adding new principles. So anyway, you're a part of all this because you're polarity thinkers in the community. So one way that we introduce this model is we start really simple, something that everybody gets. And I typically just ask people, which is better or which is more important, inhale or exhale? So it totally sets up the tension as a false choice right out of the gate. And this is that we do this intentionally because it challenges people to come up with the right answer when in fact there are two right answers. So I will say that I've had engineers basically say, well, they've actually tried to argue this. Nothing against engineers. They're great problem solvers, and that's actually their gift. And problem solving for a polarity just doesn't really work very well. The reason is there are two right answers, and those answers at a point in time, you can align the data to your particular preference. So if you say inhale is the answer, you're right. If you say exhale is the answer, well, you're right. So there are two right answers. And if we look at the two diagonals in a polarity, you can see that they're both correct, but they're not complete. If you tried to choose a pole for those good reasons, it wouldn't be sustainable over time. You'd basically expire. So to Barry Johnson's credit, he really, I think, did a great job of simplifying the approach to how we see these tensions. And he basically said, either or thinking is not great for leveraging polarities. We actually need to supplement our thinking. We need to look at how do these two poles of the polarity work together over time to achieve a greater purpose. And in this case, the greater purpose would be to live. So when we move to step 2, notice what we're doing is we're actually mapping out what are the unique benefits of each pole of the polarity and what are the two very predictable limitations of each pole. And the process of mapping actually helps us to see it more completely. And once we see it more completely, here's the beauty of polarities, is you can't unsee it once you've seen it. And that is a huge gift, because if I pose that question, which is better, inhale or exhale, you're not going to fall for it. You're going to say, oh, I know how that works. There's a benefit to each pole and a limitation. I'm not falling for it, Kayser. You're not going to do that to me. All right. So there is some practice that we need to, and some habits to get out of to be really good polarity thinkers. The existence of a tension does not necessarily make it a polarity. So you might say, oh, well, what about rigid versus open, or ambiguous versus clear? First of all, we want to get out of the habit of using versus when we talk about a polarity, because it sets it up as an either or choice. And both of the poles need to be both neutral or both positive. So those wouldn't work as polarities for two reasons. Number one, rigid is probably not something you would be excited about doing, or ambiguous for that matter, necessarily. So the question is, what would be the polarity here? What would be the possible pole names that we could look at? Structure and flexibility is something that might fit here, because the upside of structure is the clear. But if we do too much structure, without flexibility, it could lead to becoming rigid. If rigid is our problem, then being open looks like a pretty good solution. But that's not a solution that's going to be sustainable, because if we're just open without any structure, it's going to lead to some chaos and ambiguity. So you can see here the greater purpose. If the greater purpose here is to be a more conscious leader, conscious leadership, one of the polarity tensions that we're going to have to pay attention to as a conscious leader is, how do we bring in structure for the clarity? How do we bring in flexibility for the openness? And to the degree possible, minimize the rigidity and ambiguity as we go through our leadership work in our teams, in our organizations, in our communities, etc. So this is just kind of a quick and dirty here on a polarity, how we name the two poles as both neutral or both positive. And now what I'm going to move into is just looking at a deeper dive into the 5-step process. And the 5-step process, seeing and mapping, as you've seen already, kind of goes together. And then the assessing and learning goes together as well. I'm not going to spend a lot of time today on assessing and learning, because it's just so involved. We've got an incredibly robust and sophisticated assessment tool where you can assess up to 8 polarities at a time, and track demographics. And anyway, it's a whole world in and of itself that people get certified in. But we can do assessing and learning just through our conversation. Just how are we doing? It just answers the question, how are we doing with this polarity or that polarity? And then we can move into the leveraging steps, which is developing the strategies to empower both poles, and then the risk mitigation strategies to keep out of the downsides. And what you might start to already notice just in this graphic right here is this infinity loop is disproportionately benefiting the two upsides, and it's minimizing the downsides. You can't get rid of the polarity because it's unsolvable and ongoing, but you can leverage it. So one of the things that we say is that leverage is a much better aspirational goal than balance. I think most of us probably balance these tensions, but not everyone leverages them. And Jim Collins in Good to Great says that what separates good leaders from great leaders is they manage these tensions better than the rest. So that's actually why we start with with ourselves, looking at our behaviors as well as our values. And because everything follows from that. If we're conscious ourselves, then it's going to impact our relationships with others, and it's going to impact our relationship with our teams. It's going to impact our relationship with the larger systems that we're a part of. So it all starts with the leader being conscious. So that is why leaders who can supplement either or technical problem solving with both and polarity leveraging are going to be better and more conscious leaders. Let's look at a couple of kind of the most basics. I mean, we probably learned about this polarity when we were 2 years old, when the neighborhood kid came over to play with us, and they were grabbing at our toys, and we said, hey, wait a minute, you can't have that, that's mine. And somebody, probably some conscious leader, we call it a parent, said, hey, you need to share your toys. Sharing is a way of getting my needs met, and others' needs met over time. So we can't just think about ourselves, we have to also think about the needs of others. We can also get in trouble by over focusing on the needs of others to the neglect of our own needs. And this is how we get into healthcare systems where the people who are taking care of the patients are getting sick themselves because they're so burned out, so overtaxed. So it's called vicarious trauma, by the way. There's a whole body of work that's focused on people in helping professions who basically lose their own identity in that process. So we need to put on our own oxygen mask first, so that we can do a good job of taking care of others' needs. They're both important over time. And by the way, every major faith community on the planet has some version of this, golden rule or platinum rule, however you want to frame it, that basically is paying attention to this need to focus on impact as well as intent. And it's amazing when you think about, how is it that we ended up on celebrating this day, Juneteenth, where about the end of slavery. Why are we celebrating that? I mean, we're celebrating for good reasons, but why did we get there in the first place? Well, we probably applied either or thinking to a particular pole preference, and the use of power played into that, and certain people were subjects of other people, which is not sustainable over time. So, and when you look at the systems, the parts, the freedom, uniqueness, initiative of the parts, and you look at the whole, the equity and equality and the connectedness and synergy, that's playing into self and other at a system level. If you over focus on the part to the neglect of the whole, you get inequity, inequality, isolation, polarization, lack of coordination, and you get systemic issues around poverty, racism, sexism, etc. Over focus on the whole to the neglect of the part, and you also have some issues. So I'm so glad to see a hand up because I was just about to open up. I'd love to hear some just initial thoughts in the chat, and also if you'd be willing to take yourself off mute just to perhaps comment on what we've seen so far. So Lyndon, you got your hand up.
Yeah, Cliff, thank you. And great content. And this particular slide brings me to thinking about the political environment that's playing out in the world today, and there is a turning away, whether it's from globalism or collective orientation to much more of independence. And, connecting it back to this, perhaps the goal that we all have is that we all thrive, but have we as a whole lost the belief that that's possible, that in fact there is a breakdown of interdependence more towards independence, that we believe it has to be taking care of our own interests because we can't trust the other. So the question for me, and you might be getting to this with some of the other content, is what happened to us, and what do we need to do to get back to a place, and I mean at a meta level, right, in the national global scene. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, well, it's a beautiful, well, I mean, it's a beautiful comment in terms of just the recognition of where we are right now and how difficult it is. It's not a new struggle, but it seems new to us because we're so in it right now. And it seems like each generation has to address it in their own unique context. And here we are now. Joel used the word, democratic, when he was talking about conscious leadership and democratizing, the tools and everything. Democracy is the only system that we have developed as human beings that can that can leverage polarities. Monarchies are very either or focused, and they don't have the ability to shift between poles. If you disagree with the monarch, either you're going to disappear or the monarch's going to disappear over time, but it's probably not going to happen in a way that doesn't involve some pretty violent and oppressive action. So how do we peacefully navigate these tensions? There's no other, and democracy admittedly is messy and difficult and hard, and so are these tensions, and the democracy is the only hope for us on the planet to do what has separated human beings from the animals, which is to coordinate in large numbers. And the minute we lose faith in our ability to coordinate in large numbers, to your point, things are going to devolve. And we are going to cover some of that here going forward. And I think, your point is so well timed here. We need to support each other. We need to meet each other where we are. We also need to question our assumptions about ways that might not be serving all people in sustainable ways. There are two ways to oppress here in this tension between support and challenge. You might want to call it, support and accountability. There's all kinds of ways you could name these poles. As long as they're both neutral or positive, they would work. But if you over support without challenging, you can create oppression through your enablement, your collusion, or your being complicit or silent in the face of harm. If you over challenge without supporting, you become the oppressor, you become the bully, you become, someone who is now doing exactly what they said others shouldn't be doing. So it's a tough needle to thread here in terms of how to do this nonviolent communication, and there's a lot of there's a lot of methodologies out there that try to navigate this tension around support and challenge, but we're all in it, and hopefully we can find ways to maximize the upsides of both poles and minimize the downsides. But it's not easy. Here's my tip of the hat to the chapters in volume 1 and 2 of And. By the way, volume 1 is on the foundation theory that was written by Barry Johnson. He has a lot of chapters that are focused on justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion type issues. And then volume 2, the first 5 chapters of volume 2 were all written by people in marginalized groups around Jedi-focused tensions. And so that would be my way of celebrating Juneteenth with all of you, is to say that we have a lot of great resources that we've put together in both books that support helping to heal from poorly leveraging these tensions in the past and present. And hopefully we can do better together in the future. Joel, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I'm just noticing Chris's question out here in chat. And he asks, can you say more about fears as referenced in the diagram? Is it that fear is what drives the other over focusing on aspect of the polarity? So the over focusing.
Yeah, fear can be a driver. I mean, some people really are turned off by that term. They can be individual fears, they can be collective fears. I think one way to think about fears and the downsides is the impact that we would, as individuals or teams or organizations, like to avoid if we could. So a softer way of saying fear would be, what are the negative impacts to where is suffering occurring individually or collectively? And it could be that our wisdom about being human is rooted in our like collective DNA that has helped us survive as long as we have as a species, that that came from things that were threatening, and so it's in our neurobiology even. So I mean, we've had some pushback, people saying, well, I don't fear anything, you know, I fear no man, you know, and I don't like that term. If you don't like that term, just swap it out for something that would mean something that the impact of which you'd like to avoid, or to avoid suffering for yourself or for others. Great question. All right. So I would love to get some interaction here. I'm glad to see these questions in the chat. Thank you for those. So yeah, it's a difficult time. There seems to be a shift towards authoritarianism on the planet. If you just look at what's happening politically around the globe, but there's also polarities that are just showing up for us in our daily life. I was engaging last night with my coach, and she said, "Whoa, you know, you've got some background in polarity thinking based on what I've seen, you know, out there on the web. What's the polarity you're struggling with right now around this?" And it really forced me to name it, and it was quite useful. I guess it's the cobbler's children have no shoes sort of thing. But I'm curious, what are some polarities that are going on for you right now? And this is a good way to practice the seeing step. If you want to show how solid you are as a polarity thinker, one way to do it is to make sure that you're naming both poles of the polarity neutrally or positively, which isn't as easy as you might think. There are two good things that are interdependent, like inhale and exhale, and we don't want to use verses when we describe the two poles. So we want to use and so I'd love to see just what's going on for people in the room around polarities that you're dealing with in your work or in your life, your home life, whatever. Maybe the polarity is work and home, you know. That's a pretty common one. There's always a tension there. So yeah, flexibility and multitasking. Interesting. Yeah, it's funny because multitasking to me, this is where it gets fun, that we can start getting into some dialogue around what's the polarity, how would we name the poles. When I multitask, I'm trying to be flexible, and I'm actually letting go of the structure of my focus. So it's funny because I think multitasking and flexibility probably sit on this on the same general energetic, but maybe, you know, maybe I'm not understanding it from your context as much, Ruth. But yeah, like usually it's something like focus, you know, disciplined focus and flexible multitasking, you know, usually shows up as some type of attention. I see personal well-being, collective well-being, independence and interdependence. Yeah, great. Yeah, the generational tensions come in. They're like part tensions. So it's like a self and other sort of thing. But yeah, these are fun to play with. So I'm just listening and questioning. Oh man, that's a perfect setup for the breakout we're going to do in just a little bit. So yeah, so when I look at some of these, like you can see, like there are many existing bodies of work. Judith Glaser comes to mind. She talks about conversational intelligence, and it's rooted. She roots it in the neurobiology. She basically says, or neuroscience rather, which is, I guess, the same thing as neurobiology. But anyway, that she has three levels of conversation. One is ask and tell. The other is advocate and inquire, and the other is share and discover. And she said they're very different contexts in this conversational intelligence. Ask and tell is very transactional. You know, do I do this or this? Yes, do this. Okay, good, done, move on. But then there level 2 around positional. And this is where there can be some healthy debate about, advocating for my point of view and also inquiring about another person's point of view. So there's some room to sort of navigate the tension in terms of just coming up with the right answer if you don't know it. And then the level 3 conversation is share and discover. And she calls that transformational level. So it's so fun when I see stuff in the chat around different tensions. Oh my gosh, Charlie, wow, Judith was your coach. Bless her soul. What a contribution she made. How lucky can you get to have her as your coach? She, yeah, without knowing anything maybe about polarities or polarity theory or Barry Johnson, or she laid out her entire life's work on 3 polarities. And that's true of a lot of conscious leadership competencies. Actually, they look at them in pairs. So what gets in the way of leveraging polarities? A couple things. I'll just net them out for you. First of all, strong preferences for a particular pole of a polarity. And we all have them. I mean, look at the Myers-Briggs. We all have these preferences for certain ways of taking in information, making decisions, etc. But then when we misapply either or thinking to the preference or to the pole preference, when we would be better served by seeing it as a both and, that's another layer of dysfunction. If we add power to the mix, now it gets pretty vicious because we have the power to make the decision and, to heck with anyone and everyone else. And so you can see how an all of the above combination can really get things sideways very quickly. I'm just looking at the time, and I was hoping to have you all in breakouts by now, and I'm kind of blowing it. So I'm gonna go through this really quickly because leadership enters through the technical door, and for very good reasons. There's some good things about either or technical thinking, but when we get into leadership, we need to supplement that thinking with both and. This is going to be around the emotional social intelligence. A lot of times we haven't had the same amount of training for the adaptive that we have for the technical. So what happens is we start applying technical thinking to adaptive issues, and it leads to a lot of poor collaboration and stagnation, rigidity. So, we're told then, hey, you need to be a better leader. You need to coordinate and collaborate and whatever, communicate, manage conflict better. But then people say, well, that's just going to slow things down. I'm going to lose my respect for a subject matter expertise, and I might not get the results that I'm used to getting by just being that technical leader. So you can see how, without the upsides of adaptive thinking, a leader can get caught. They can get hooked and stuck. This isn't a form of assessment right here. Someone's hooked and stuck in the downside of this pole. So anyway, that's how vicious cycles get kicked off. And great leaders can do both. And it doesn't mean you have to do an equal amount of both. It just means you have access to both upsides to support your conscious leadership to get results with and through other people. You can see this is kind of my last sort of hurrah before we have some conversations and breakouts. You can see though, if you've only got, or you're focused on either or thinking, as you're faced with these different tensions between different polarities, it becomes a really easy choice. I'll focus on myself. I'll focus on my group. I'll focus on my individual rights. I'll focus on my power. I'll focus on my own truth and experience. I'll celebrate my own uniqueness, and I'll have pride. I'll be proud of myself and my history, and to the heck with everybody else. So you can see, if a leader is not conscious around their choices, around these tensions, and if they don't have access to and thinking, and they oversimplify the complexity of these tensions, you can see how it ends up in a vicious cycle very, very quickly. The corollary to that is if you have access to and thinking, to supplement or thinking with and thinking, it's maybe a little messier, may seem a little slower, but over time, it's going to reduce the resistance. It's going to improve the sustainability of decision making, and it's going to lead to a much more virtuous cycle in which everybody benefits, including the leader. So it's in our own self-interest to leverage polarities. So this is why it's so important as a gateway theory to conscious leadership, I believe, and why I wanted to just highlight this, especially on Juneteenth, because you can see, had this been done better or more effectively in the past, we might not have had so much pain and suffering in our systems. So this is my tip of the hat to Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey. This is basically his book in a polarity map. And the reason I wanted to highlight this is because he based his book, Speed of Trust, on the tension between competency and character, which is just another flavor variation of IQ and EQ. And so I basically organized the whole book, including the action steps, the strategies around. So this would be essentially a summary of the book in a polarity map. I put the early warning signs in there because the book didn't cover them, but you can see how you could do this for many different theories. I've done this for Myers-Briggs. I do assessments in Myers-Briggs. I do assessments for this polarity, for Speed of Trust. I do assessments for Jedi tensions. So this is kind of the wrap up here on this very critical distinction between the genius of or and the genius of and. We need to solve problems, and we need to leverage polarities, and we need to not oversimplify with or to create polarization, but we don't need to overcomplicate with and either, because that gets confusing and frustrating for people. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to just throw you in a breakout for a few minutes with a partner, and I'd like you to just look at this tension between fact-based opinion and or fact-based information and opinion-based information, and think about this in the context of strategies. Sorry, I went through that so fast, but the step 5 in the polarity map is action steps and early warning signs. It's essentially the strategy to create leverage. And so I provided an example of, all right, well, fact-based decision, we know there's some good things about facts. We also know there's some good things about listening to people's opinions. If we over-focus on facts without giving people a chance to share their opinion, we can kind of get into trouble there. We can also get into trouble if we're over-focusing on opinions without facts. And I think we're looking at an election year where people are kind of, debating who they're going to choose, making an important either or choice around a decision. And I think all of us would benefit by developing our own strategy, what works for us in this support and challenge process around navigating these issues. And I was thinking, okay, well, one action step for me is, I'm not going to talk QAnon garbage. I'm going to offer to explore fact-based information together for quality dialogue, but I'm not going to waste my time in rabbit holes. And I need to make that clear to people. And I also, I want to hear their point of view and what's valuable and what's important to them. But I don't want to enable bad behavior either. So everyone has to do this in their own way. And it's going to differ from person to person. I mean, my conversation with my mother is different from, maybe one of my fraternity brothers. Or someone I meet on the street, or someone who might be doing, my house renovation right now, who were just kind of, but we're all in it. And so for the breakout activity, I'm just kind of curious, what other polarities are challenging to you nowadays. And if you want to look at this fact-based information and opinion-based information tension, you can engage around that if that's a challenge for you. But basically, what I'm most interested in having you do is jump in a conversation with a partner about how these tensions are showing up for you now. And when we come back, we're just going to debrief a couple of highlights from your discussion, and then just do a quick Q&A, and we're going to be done. So we're going to post this sample here in the chat, and we're going to turn you loose into breakouts to just have some conversation together. Fantastic. Oh man, I had such a delightful breakout with Ruth. I'm still kind of basking in it. Yeah, so let's just do I know we're kind of pressed for time, so we can't do kind of full debriefs, but if someone, some people would volunteer just some highlights and headlines from their breakout, it'd be great to hear what some of the big takeaways were.
I can go. I just think this is a fascinating conversation, but one of the things that I kind of got caught up on, and Linda and I had some great conversations, is, but as you are trying to problem solve, right? And you want to acknowledge all sides, does then you're simply ending up in the middle? Like when you start to get into the hows and the solutions, and it is a yes and, how to find where that place is that you can move forward from.
Yeah, great point. Well, the middle is better than a vicious cycle, which is the deepest fear at the bottom. But the greater purpose that both poles share and their upsides, that's the orienting North Star. That's what we're after. And if we set the bar up there, an example of what you're talking about is, we talk about, sustainability, environmental sustainability. Well, the only reason we're talking about sustainability is because right now it's unsustainable the way we're treating the planet. We're in a vicious cycle. So sustainability looks pretty good, but there are actually methods of smart buildings and other ways of looking at how can we actually be better than sustainable. How can we have a negative footprint? That's not the discussion. We're just trying to get out of the viciousness. So that would be an example of just kind of let's try to shoot for some balance here. But balance and leverage are two different things.
That's great. That makes a lot of sense, and takes me out of trying to figure out, like, it takes it to a whole new level.
Yeah. We're setting the bar too low. We need to set the bar towards leverage for greater purpose as the orienting principle for these tensions, whatever they are.
Which can actually lead for the systems change kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. We're kind of lowest common denominator thinking is just, it's like the plant in my room. I have to keep turning it because it keeps going towards the window to where the sun is. It's like seeking out that sunlight, and I turn it, so it gets the other side. It's the same thing with a greater purpose. If we can basically set the bar high, like we can get here, we can do this. How do we do it together? It's a different conversation entirely. It's a more conscious conversation. Yeah, I wish I was in that group. I'm sure it was a very rich discussion. Yeah. I mean, it was great to be with Ruth. Don't get me wrong, Ruth. We had a delightful conversation. Yeah.
Cliff, just something to always process in this, and what Chris actually reframed a little bit with some of the language was, thinking about like vertical development, or how we're all on this journey and moving from dependence to independence to interdependence. Chris said, boy, it's like we have to go through the adolescence, the independence, right? And that's going to be messy and cause all sorts of damage and, concern. And yet, how do we trust that as part of the journey? but yet when it plays out, to your point, every generation, it's like, how do we overcome some of these things, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just so, that's the work. That's the work. How do we hold a place? How do we support each other and challenge each other? Meet people where they are, do our own work, while we're helping the system do its work. It's just, it's incredibly complex and messy, and it's also a beautiful thing that makes us human, if we can appreciate that part of it. I mean, I appreciate you bringing that up. I know we're at time here. It's having some space for joy in the process, as difficult as it can be, is the only reason I get out of bed in the morning, or else I think I would just get completely depressed. You know, that these are opportunities to see ourselves and others more completely. These challenges are ways of, um, you know, they help us grow, and they help us, you know, they help us, to see ourselves and others in the context of our great challenges. And we've got some big ones in front of us. So we need conscious leaders, that that are capable of holding this complexity and not oversimplifying it.